typos. But thank you guys all for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I'm going to, for this presentation, start very big and just talk about the current landscape of drones and how people love them and hate them, how the technology is advancing, and then kind of walk it through to how it's being currently applied for larger scale conservation projects, and ultimately getting to monk seals and what we think we're going to use the platforms for, because we're very early on, as I'll explain, in the use of this technology for monk seals in particular, but there is a lot of cool stuff going on around the world using these platforms. So first, we're going to start at proper terminology, and this I will start out by saying is my opinion on what we should call them. It is most presentations and many meetings about these spend a lot of time arguing about what to call them. So most people know them as drones. It's sort of ubiquitous in our language. A lot of people shy away from using that term for two reasons. One is obviously the militaristic connotations that are related to it for surveillance or for targeted strikes. So professionals that use them for other than military reasons have moved away from that. But it's also just the negative connotation about the word, that drone implies some sort of automaton, sort of like a worker bee, where these platforms actually really quite sophisticated and can do a wide array of things. They can fly on their own, they can be piloted. So they feel it's somewhat derogatory or demeaning to the platform itself to call it such a classless name. So others will call it, my agency in particular, unmanned aerial systems is a common one, or unmanned aerial vehicles. But it's also been the focus of political correctness, where unmanned is not fair to all sexes. This is serious. So they'll call them unpersoned, which I'm not even sure is a word, or some other version of that. And the Air Force in particular right now, this is probably the most accurate title to call it, is the remotely piloted aircraft. I call them drones. It is, in speaking to an audience, particularly when you're talking to stakeholders and friends and coworkers, you say drones and people know what you're talking about. You don't have to sit there and explain. It makes presentations a whole lot easier when you just say drones instead of trying to get your mouth around unmanned aerial systems. So for the presentation, most of the time it will be drones. And I might get some grief from my colleagues, but that's the way I prefer to go with it. So what does the world look like right now in terms of drones? You guys have probably all, you probably can't read a newspaper or watch the news without something being in, whether it's the military side of drones, or what's happened most recently as drones have proliferated in public, that you have a lot of people that are using them and a lot of people that are using them pretty stupidly. So you have planes in the Western United States that are being diverted from fighting forest fires because they've had to divert their path because somebody's had drones. You've had people flying drones onto the lawn of the White House. You've had people flying drones into the paths of landing airplanes and airplanes taking off at places. So that is the bad side of drones. That's the stupid side of drones. And that's actually the side of drones that could make our future use for conservation or other really practical purposes, such as maybe delivering your pizza or other things, unfeasible for us, because other people are using what could be a really valuable tool. Because right now the technology is far outpacing both the advances of it and the proliferation of it are advancing the regulations. The FAA right now is really, really struggling to keep up with drones. Right now, a lot of the things that control drone use are things that were developed for commercial and recreational aircraft use, like big planes, manned planes. And that obviously doesn't really suit something that can sit in your hand and be flown around. So we are at a tipping point where the FAA is working very hard to get reasonable legislation in, but things such as the paparazzi using it or other folks using it to invade privacy or get into dangerous situations makes everyone very uncomfortable. So drones come in many shapes and sizes. The two standard, there are some exceptions to this, but the two standard ones are your fixed wing, your more traditional plane-like types of drones, and then your multi-copters, which can either, they're like helicopters, they can have one rotor for some of them, or others can have up to 8, 9, 10 or more. And they can range from something like the global hawk, which is in the picture up in the top left of the screen, which is obviously a very massive platform, as you can see from the person pulling it. But this is very long range, high duration sort of platform that has lots of different utilities, including surveillance and other things. A smaller version is the Puma, which is one of the platforms that we use. So this weighs, I think, about 13 pounds. It's hand launched. It's highly portable. It breaks apart. You can put it in Pelican cases and travel with it. And then for the multi-copter side, the one on the top right just shows you how small they're getting now. That one has absolutely no utility for conservation and stuff, but it's fun to have. And then I think that's an octocopter at the bottom, 8 blades. These are the vertical takeoff and landing things. So these are of real interest while the fixed wings have to continue to fly. These take off straight, land straight, but they can hover in the air. So they give you a lot more stability depending on the question that you want. So this is the sort of shopping list. And I mean, there's everything in between that researchers and consumers get to look at when they're determining what sort of platform that they want to use. So just like in the commercial or recreational market, where people are starting to use these all the time, conservationists have started to really grab. In fact, there's an organization called Conservation Drones, which is a pretty cool group that goes out and works with a lot of different conservation researchers and agencies around the world, particularly in developing nations, to figure out how they can support and develop platforms for them to use to do remote work like this. So a couple of the examples, I just went in onto the web real quick and grabbed some photos, but the one on the left is surveying pretty dense jungle, looking for orangutan nests. So again, when you're thinking about why you want to use these, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, one way to track orangutans, one way to look at the health and distribution of the population is to count nests. So this traditionally is done by hiking and looking up and trying to look through that canopy to figure out what's going on. Being able to fly over something obviously seems like it'd be much more efficient. On the top right are elephants in Sumatra. Pretty limited number of animals there, very endangered, and having to look over a wide, a very large area, complex habitat. So instead of having to drive or to hike through trying to find these animals, having something that can fly for miles and is cheaper than an airplane or renting an airplane can be really effective. Another good use of them is deforestation, monitoring deforestation. So a lot of the places that are illegally logging are difficult to get to in the middle of very tough terrain. Quite often they'll deforest a pocket within a really dense area, so you can't see from the outside what's going on, but you fly over and you can see massive areas of trees and lumber being removed. So using quite often trying to track management of natural resources like this. So why drones? Why are they proliferating in conservation? There's a lot of reasons. One is to help with access. So I talked about trying to find orangutans, but there's a whole lot of other reasons. A good example is this telephone pole. This is an osprey nest on the top of it. The pilots are down below about 30 or 40 feet or so. And traditionally, if you wanted to go to an osprey's nest to look at how many eggs there were or how the chicks were doing, you'd have to find the pole, find the nest, and then put on your spikes and put on your strap and climb up that pole, all the while hoping that an osprey is not swooping in and plucking out valuable bits like your eyes and stuff. So in about 15 seconds, you can launch this thing up, you can fly over it, take a picture, and come back down and leave. Still obviously looking for the osprey, but it gets to our next thing, minimizing disturbance. The total time that you're going to be there is lessened. Having to survey a bird colony and being able to just fly over it to count birds instead of walking through counting everyone individually, obviously going to be a huge minimizing of disturbance for that. Safety, I'd rather fly a hexacopter or a multicopter up on the top of that rather than have to climb hundreds of those poles 40 feet in the air, hoping not to get attacked. But the real big safety thing is where they can replace the use of actually manned flights. So you have an example like right whale surveys on the east coast of the United States. Generally, when you're using a small plane, they'll fly them up and down the coast looking for this endangered whale. When you're doing surveys, aerial surveys in a plane, you fly low and you fly slow. And generally, you are flying at sometimes closer to the limits of where that aircraft should be operated. And you fly hundreds and hundreds of hours of these surveys all of that exacerbates the inherent danger in doing those types of surveys. So when you can find ways to put up a platform that may cost thousands of dollars, but isn't going to endanger a human, I think that's I think we'd all agree, a very smart move to shift to that while maintaining the quality of the science that you're looking for. And then cost. Drones used to be absurdly expensive, and some of them still are. But obviously you can go to a store now and you can buy for a couple of $100s a drone that can fly for 20 minutes and you can fly it on your phone. And the technology has moved from the military to commercial use very quickly, very rapidly. And they're making so many of them now that cost has come way down. So that offsets the cost that you might have for personnel time. Instead of having to get 20 people to hike through a jungle to find orangutan nests, you can have 2 pilots and a platform and do as many surveys as you want. So the personnel is cheaper. It is usually cheaper than renting a plane, and obviously, most importantly, it's safer. And then the ease of use. These things have been made that anybody can fly them, so they're really easy to practice on, pick up the techniques, and be on your way. And I think one of the things that is not discussed as much is from a naturalist point of view or from a biologist point of view. The work we do is generally you're in the environment you're working in, right? So when we work on monk seals, we're walking down the beach and we're looking at the seals laterally and we're looking at the habitat around them, but it's very much this view, me looking at you as the audience is the regular view, or you looking at me. Getting that bird's eye view really starts to make you look at things in a different way. So when you're flying above and you start to see how, say for bird species or plants, how the distribution of them is based on the landscape, and seeing these patterns from a very, very different from a bird's eye view can really help scientists understand better the relationship between the animals or the plants they're studying and the physical environment and other factors. And the other side, if you look at it from the outreach standpoint, I can show the same slides of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands or monk seals time and time again. I take a video from a drone flying over and get a slightly different view. People are wrapped with it. It's almost the same as when we started putting the cameras on the backs of the seals to get their perspective of what they're doing. It's just a really powerful tool to get that new view. And there's a variety of other things that are beneficial for them too. But before you go out and use them, one of the problems with new technology, and there's a lot of people, sometimes myself included, when a new technology comes, you kind of race out to get it because it's cool, it's sexy, it's new, and then you start trying to figure out the question that you want to ask with it. That's the same thing with drones. They're so affordable now, people are like, I'm just going to grab that, and then eventually we'll think about what we're going to do with it. So it's a really important step that as a conservation biologist, you think about if it's really an appropriate tool. And then you can select the payload. So payloads, that's basically the sampling instrument that you're going to put on the drone. You're not just flying these things around just for the heck of it. You're trying to collect some bit of data. So the payload can vary in what it can be used for. It can be a simple high-resolution camera. It can be a video camera. It can be an infrared camera if you're looking for, say, turtles basking at nighttime. Or animals in dense foliage, and you can detect them underneath the bushes. You can use multispectral cameras that can actually differentiate between different species of plant. So it can help you map vegetation coverage. You can use LiDAR, which is a tool that's used to create three-dimensional maps of the environment. So, and these all vary in both the power that they draw and in the weight. So you have to select which platform you want to fly it on and which tool that you want to use. But there's a whole, and the technology, again, with all this keeps advancing. So there's more and more tools that are coming available for us to use. And you have to consider the environment. And this is really, really, really important because particularly early on, these platforms were designed in a warehouse or in a factory, and they were tested in a temperature and environmentally controlled flight system, and then you bring them down to Antarctica, and you didn't consider that maybe the battery is going to freeze up. And so you launch it up 80 feet in the air, drain all the very limited power that's left there, and then it crashes, and your $60,000 UAS is smashed and unusable for the rest of your field season. True story, I won't talk about who that happened to, but that's the case. So you really have to consider the tool. So wet versus dry. If you're working in the ocean or in the marine environment, you have to assume that at some point you're probably going to crash in the water. So you want to make sure that your platform can resist it, or the next thing that you are available or it's affordable enough that you can lose it. There are some projects that invest so much of their resources into the drones and it's a really critical tool, but once it crashes, they're struggling to keep their work going. And so I guess we'll just, for the sake of time, keep moving. The other thing, and I'll show this in the next video more, is the response of the wildlife to what you're doing. So UASs are really great, drones are really great, they're going to allow you different perspectives, but you really need to think about the animal environment that you're working in, not just the species that you're looking for or the plant that you're looking for, but how are the other active members of the ecosystem going to respond to the tool that you're using. These are just some of the considerations. But you can come up with a really great plan. You can be completely convinced that this is going to be successful. You bring your tool to the wild, and or into the wild environment, into nature, and things can go wrong, and they can go wrong quickly. So this is just some clips of how animals can interfere with the work that you're doing. Oh
my God. Wow.
These things don't fly very quickly, so it's not smart to go against the fastest land mammal on the planet. Okay, I had to edit this one, turn it off. So this gets back to, can you afford to lose it? So he's trying to get it from this sheep or this ram, and you can't hear it right now, but as it plays off, you continue to hear this baaing, and the guy cursing as he's trying to get back to get it. I'm assuming he eventually gets it because he downloaded the footage. But that's all very entertaining, but on the serious side, I think that video should be probably called "You're Too Close." So many of these behaviors I wouldn't condone, and a lot of it is taken from recreational use, people doing pretty irresponsible things. But it does bring home that point that you really, really need to think about when you go into these things, how particularly animals are going to respond to the instrument. You know, whether it is predatory cheetahs or call them playful, whatever, stalking. The thing I was thinking about that is you have this cheetah following, you have to bring that drone back to you at some point. And so I just wonder what's going through their calculus of attracting that animal back to them. But anyway, you need to just be very, very careful how you apply this. And most serious conservationists, most biologists that are using these do a stepwise process, and I'll talk about ours when you're introducing these and using them for the first time, making sure that they are compatible with the environment that you're working in. So that's the basics that's sort of drone 101. And so now looking at drones and marine mammals and what the state of the art currently is for that. Drones are of a lot of interest to us. Marine mammals are really hard to work on for a variety of reasons, whether it is the environment that they live in. For particularly whales and dolphins, you only see them a tiny part of their life because most of it's spent underwater. But also a lot of the animals are really susceptible to disturbance. So you take colonial seals and sea lions that have been particularly harmed and harassed over the last centuries for sealing, or just fishermen trying to reduce populations, or tourists coming in and disturbing them. But a lot of the colonies that people work on, including myself for my PhD, on working on Australian fur seals, if the colony, sometimes of hundreds or thousands plus animals, get a whiff of you, they'll stampede into the water and they'll be gone. So if your job is to do population assessment, and you can't get close enough to count, it's really, really difficult. And seeing a colony of 1,000 animals stampeding to the water it's a pretty horrific thing to see. It's animals running over each other and all this stuff. So, whatever you can do to avoid that. So, for instance, this is some seals on the east coast of the U.S. Flying a drone around it to count them can be really quite a useful tool. So using them to count, to assess condition. This is a leopard seal. This is some work that's done by the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, NOAA Fisheries partner science center. And they're doing this. This is a leopard seal down in Antarctica. And they're doing a study, and we're actually reproducing it for monk seals, where they are flying over leopard seals. They're measuring them remotely. They're capturing them and sedating them and measuring them as well. And what they're hoping to do is developing a non-invasive tool so that they can monitor leopard seals in a changing environment. So as sea ice melts back, that's going to affect krill, which is the cornerstone for all the species down in Antarctica. Leopard seals are an apex predator. They eat all the penguins that eat the krill. They eat all the seals that eat the krill. They eat everything. So they might be the first to really demonstrate that something is going wrong with the environment. So by building this metric and being able to sample hundreds of leopard seals that they might fly over, they'll be able to detect early on what sort of things might be happening within the environment. So visual assessments, that again could be looking at flying over an animal to see what type of injury it might have, whether it needs an intervention. A really good example is the disentanglement group out here for the humpback whale. They're quite talented folks at disentangling, and they're always trying to find ways to advance what they're doing. So right now they're considering how drones could potentially be used to fly ahead. Now, if you think about when you're going to disentangle a whale, you know the disentanglement's there. Quite often there'll be something dragging behind them, but there's a lot of rope and other things that can be underwater, and you're approaching in a boat with a prop, trying to get a cutting instrument or a buoy to slow down the whale, while navigating all of these unknown dangers underwater. And they can stick GoPros underwater and the like, but they would like more information before they made the approach. So they're talking about if they can fly a drone over the animal, assess its condition, assess the complexity of the entanglement, what the gear is exactly, look for points where they can best target disentanglement, and even dropping the drone in front of the whale with a camera underneath it so that they can, because you can have this so it streams live to you. And so they can actually see what all is going on with the entanglement so that they have a better plan before they approach the whale. So a lot of people are coming up with some pretty creative ways to test these. And then health sampling, which I won't spoil yet, but it's a pretty cool and pretty new technique. So a couple of examples. This is probably the one that's received the most news in the last year. So this is work that's been done at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center by a colleague named John Durbin and his team, and in collaboration with the Vancouver Aquarium. So studying killer whales, flying drones over to see how they could potentially aid the science. So here's a video. The platform they're using is the APH-22. It's a hexacopter. It's the same hexacopter we just used in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And I'm just going to play this through and then and have you guys kind of take in things, and then I'm going to dissect some of the things that the experts can pull from the video. So it takes off from their hands, cruises over. Okay. So I just want to make one quick note. I was watching this with some kids one day, and one of the girls in the class after the video said, "I didn't know that killer whales, what did she say, breathe out rainbows or something, because every time the blow would come up, there'd be this little rainbow." I did not ruin that for her. I just said, "Of course they do." So that's really great. It's, they're impressive animals. They're beautiful to watch. Nice background music. But there's actually a lot of science that goes into this. And dissecting this, the first and foremost is that in this video and all of the video that I've seen from this and that the scientists have seen, there's no response whatsoever. So these platforms are by the whales. The platforms are flying, I think, at about 100 feet or maybe 150 feet or something above the whales. The things are just a tiny little dot in the sky when you look up at them. Obviously not really on the radar of these animals, and that's really important. So the different types of stuff that you can get is killer whales are identified by their saddle patch, that white marking behind their dorsal fin. Each one has a characteristic mark, and scientists can use that to track them through their life. And they can, from this visual target or from this visual angle, still identify those animals. Traditionally, if you wanted to do that, you would have to take a small boat near the group, and cetacean biologists around the world that are working on photo ID of dolphins and whales are phenomenal at this. They have gotten it down to an art where they minimize disturbance. But there are still times when you approach them where the cetacean wants nothing to do with you. And you can tell because they'll start to dive and they'll swim away and they'll appear 100 feet behind you, and then you'll kind of turn around. And so generally, biologists will then call it off. Most senior or lead scientists will say they don't want anything to do with us, we'll move on. But you're driving a boat, you have a motor, you are affecting their environment by the work that you're doing. With a drone, these guys are sometimes up to 1 kilometer away. You have to operate within visual line of sight, but that gives you a lot of distance. Flying these things over, it's streaming real time, so they can tell when the whales are underneath them, and they take their photos or they take their video, and the whales never know anything. Boats turned off, the whales never know any better. So it doesn't cause disturbance. So there's a purity of that. There's a goodness of that. But you can identify the individuals. You can tell age, size class. You can tell sex when you know the identification of the animal. And so you're getting the basic population assessment information that you're interested in. But it goes a bit further. And this is really what it gets to that statement I said from the different perspectives. So taking a lateral view of a whale, you get only this much of it, right? And you need really to understand the symmetry to understand the condition of the animal. And so this is a good example of, I'm not sure if this has a pointer. The green one? Yep, okay. Oh, it's green. So this animal on the right is what you consider to be a healthy killer whale. So it's nice fusiform body shape like a torpedo. You've got a good amount of girth around the head, but overall doing pretty well. But as condition declines, you see it indents right here by the eye patches. It's pretty much straight line, straight through, really narrow down near the peduncle. And so this is an animal that when they flew over, they could see it was doing really, really poorly and eventually disappeared. So as they're working with killer whales, particularly southern resident killer whales, which are endangered distinct population segment of killer whales, they are trying to figure out how these different threats in their environment, be they contaminants, be it food, be it disturbance, are affecting the health and condition. So finding a better way to assess how animals are doing and looking for that change in time can be a very useful tool. But that's only one step in assessing condition. The next very cool thing that they're doing is, that's the APH-22 flying above, is sampling the exhalations of the whale. And so what they've done is, instead of a camera or including a camera, they have a collection plate underneath the platform that they fly over. That's not a killer whale. Where they'll fly over a whale as it exhales, and they'll sample that. And so a lot of people assume that that blow is water. And there's a little bit of water in there because obviously water pools in that blowhole a little bit, or they might start blowing before they reach the surface, and so you get a little bit of mist. But by and large, it's snot. In fact, another group that's working on this calls their platform that they're developing Snotbot. Great for marketing. And so what they're doing is sampling that mucus and everything that's in it. And so with this plate, they can look at hormones. So they're developing techniques to try to see stress hormones or reproductive state of the animal, those sorts of things. They can do DNA on the bacterial and viral microfauna that's in the animal, and look at a couple of other parameters to understand how that whale's doing. So when you can couple that with remote biopsies, so looking at blubber, so you can look at contaminant levels in the animal, and you can look at diet through those, with these photos of condition over time. These scientists who work on a really, really difficult species, whales are hard to work with because you can't capture them like monk seals and handle them, are actually moving to a really pretty profound level of research that they've been trying to attain for a very long time. The only other way to do this is to try to get really close to a whale that doesn't want you around and stick a scooper, which is what they've done, over the blowhole and try to recover it. So great advances moving in trying to minimize. And one of the key things to think about is when you're talking about hormones and trying to measure stress, one of the biggest problems is to do that is you have to handle the animal or get really close to it to sample it. So you're stressing the animal before you measure for stress. So there's some not optimal things going on there. So this is a really great way to, as much as possible, measure stress remotely. And that's just another thing. And this, I put this slide in to remind me. So we talked about considerations you have to make before using your drone. So whales are big. Whales' lungs are really big. You're going to fly an expensive piece of equipment over something that has to exchange that volume of air in just mere moments. You know, most breaths are, so it's expending all of that. You know, if you look at a blue whale, the lung is the size of this room. So it's pushing all of that out and sucking it back in like that. So you have to fly that relatively low because you want to get the densest amount of the sample, right, before it all diffuses. So you need to make darn sure that the platform you're flying in can take the force, which can be like a water hose, like a fire hose, shooting out and still maintain flight over there so that your $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 platform doesn't get blown over right into the water. So again, using this stuff, it was slow and steady. It was, we'll fly at 50 feet, we'll fly at 30 feet, we'll fly at 20 feet. I think they've perfected it by now. But again, the things you have to think about, and some people don't, and some people lose a lot of platforms. Okay, so in the last part of this trilogy, with the little bit of time that I have left, is specifically what are we going to be doing likely with monk seals. Our interest is very similar to the ones that I've already shared. So population assessment, you know, that's our counting. Obviously, one of the biggest things that we do, we need to keep track of who's alive and how many there are. And so most of our surveying is done by, well, a lot of you, visually observing seals and getting up to them and taking photos, or being able to do it somewhat telepathically if you're DB and just knowing who's there. But our field teams in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands have to walk around pretty large areas day after day after day, counting pups, counting mothers, identifying everybody. And so we're always interested in finding ways that we can do that reduces disturbance, but still gets the same quality of information for us. A big one for us is improving access. You could argue guaranteeing access. So a couple of the sites that we work with, we don't go to very often. And when we do go, it's very hard to get to. So a good example, and I'll show you in this video, is Nihoa, which is the first of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. It's a subpopulation that for a pretty long time we could ignore. There was only maybe a dozen or so animals there. But as time has gone on, that population has really started to grow. And so it's become much more interesting to us. We don't camp there. We basically have one day on each cruise to stop there. The problem is it's nice to survey because all of the animals are concentrated on basically one sandy little beach that is maybe 300 feet across. And there's most of the rest of the island seals can't haul out on. So it's great we can just go to one place. The problem is there's only one place that you can land. and that beach or that area faces to the south. So when you have a really big swell coming in, things can be treacherous. So this is what it looks like on a good day. That's Mark Sullivan. Come next week to listen to his talk. We always send him first because he's been described by boat staff as lanky. So when you're jumping off, basically what happens is a small boat tries to time it between swells, gets up to the rock platform, and you have to jump off the bow, step off the bow of the boat onto land, and basically is sitting up there on the top of the swell or the top of the wave, and then gets dragged back down. So this is a good day. This is going to be kind of jarring to watch, just because this is a camera on the top of, I think, Jesse Bolander's head. So we got a lot of gear and a lot of people that we have to get off.
What's in those buckets?
All of our sampling gear, emergency stuff, tools if we need to use them. And so it's pretty slippery, treachery rocks.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a good day, a really good day. So, and you can see it can get kind of sketchy at times. So this is a day we would call almost flat. So this trip, when we came up just in September, it was a direct south swell. So the beach that we want to get to and where we need to land faces south. So they took the small boat out there and waited around for an hour and a half out there trying to time the swell, seeing if they could get it. And eventually scientists and the coxswain and everyone just said it was too dangerous. We can't get there. So we couldn't sample, we couldn't do our population assessment. We couldn't look, we're a little bit worried about some male aggression there. So we couldn't assess if there were more injuries related to male aggression. So basically that data point is a complete loss for us. Now, most of the seals are on one beach. We can drive right up to that beach and we could sit right behind the swell if we had a tool that we could just launch from the boat, fly over, and could fly over the seals and sample them without the seals ever knowing. So it wouldn't be perfect. We wouldn't be able to flipper tag. We wouldn't be able to do interventions if anyone needed some medical attention. Couldn't disentangle animals, but at least we would know what was going on, and that data point wouldn't be completely lost. We're also interested in using it for emergency response. So there are times, and this is an access, well, I guess going up to health assessment, the same thing, condition studies I talked about with the leopard seals, and as well as for us, obviously starvation is a big thing. So being able to get that remote monitoring so that we could fly over, or non-invasive monitoring to determine whether or not we need to intervene with, now that we have Keikaiola Hospital at Kona, being able to fly over these animals and have a much more informed perspective of the seal to know if we should go capture it and bring it into the hospital. Because once you make that call, once you grab the animal, it's really hard to not take them. Once you've got them, you want to help them. And so getting all that information before we act is really great. Emergency response, this is part access. There's times when we have to get to the Nepali coast for an animal that's been on Kauai, for an animal that's been entangled. We get a lot of partners that get us out there, but then we still have to get back to the island to look. And quite often we're confronted with some pretty nasty swells going in, and we're fine with swimming in, but we'd prefer not to have our staff go there if they don't need to. So again, being able to fly over and ensure that the seal is there and that the entanglement intervening is warranted is good for a safety issue with us. But there's also places on the coastline that are difficult for us to access. And so being able to stand at the top of a cliff to drop a drone over, a hexacopter over, to survey the beach below and see if the seal is down there can make us much more efficient when we're trying to survey a bunch of places in a remote coastline to potentially intervene. Another aspect is climate change. So this isn't directly related to the seals, but it's looking at habitat loss. And I'll show you some images, but we can use these, and a lot of people do, to map areas. So I talked about creating three-dimensional maps with LiDAR. So we can do that with the islands in the Northwest. So we can start building maps of these islands over time, so we can see how they wax and wane and they change with time, and then add those to models of sea level rise, ocean energy, all of these different things to look at what might happen to monk seal habitat in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and help inform our strategies for the future. Marine debris detection, exactly what it sounds like, doing coastal surveys for what's there and helping estimate how much it's recruiting onto land or accumulating on land, but also flying over water and looking at where these big net balls are and helping direct our marine debris team to go pick them up. Because their money's going down. They're heroic in their efforts, being able to go out there and collect tons and tons and tons of debris, which primarily impacts, monk seals have a predilection to get entangled. So it's a really big push to help with survival. But right now they detect it by putting divers in the water and doing surveys and trying to find it. So we can survey with these platforms areas that they can't get to really readily, and much larger areas than they could do in a day. So hopefully a tool that will help them out. And it helps our partners. It does bird surveys, it does plant surveys. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the state of Hawaii, other natural resource monitors out there can benefit from them. So a couple of examples. This is a ridiculous one. So this is the Akana. That was a Coast Guard C-130, which had to follow the Akana while we were using it. But the Akana is a Predator B drone. So the classic military ones, but it's a NASA drone. It's non-weaponized. And they use it for a variety of different surveys. Last year, it was helping with the Rim of the Pacific Navy operations. So we were allocated a couple of days to try to use it to see how it could maybe benefit work in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And it's not really practical. We're probably not going to use it in the future, but it is an impressive instrument. So if you watch this down here, so this is Nihoa. That's the island I talked to. This is the sandy beach that I told you we'd try to get to. This is where we land over here. This is the view of the beach from 3 nautical miles away. These things can identify ships from like 20 miles away. It's really impressive. And as it continues to zoom in, still almost 4 nautical miles away, it just kind of cycles through. It can do infrared. It can do the visual. So this is, again, now it's almost 5 nautical miles away, and you can start to see the seals. You can see marine debris. So it's really impressive. If we were ever going to use this, it would be primarily for surveillance. The monument's interested in finding people that are doing illegal incursions for fishing or landing on the islands at times. For us, a platform like this, it could fly to Midway if we needed it to. It would be useful if we were worried that we were in the midst of a disease outbreak, like an unusual mortality event, and we could fly something over that could survey all the islands really quickly. And let us know if it looked like there were a bunch of animals that were sick and dying. But for population assessment, not very practical. It's just impressive that we had a giant, formerly military drone being chased by a C-130 because the FAA required that there was eyes on it the whole time. So thank you to the Coast Guard and to NASA and to all of our partners. Very interesting use of this tool. And gratis to the Monk Seal program. But here's really what we've been doing. So we've been working for 2 field seasons now. So last June 2014, and then just this September, using 2 platforms. One is the Puma, which is that hand-launched one that I showed you, which is a fixed-wing plane, can fly for about 2 hours, a little bit more. And that's for large-scale surveys, takes a lot of great imagery of the islands, can do the LiDAR work, can take video. That's really big, that large-scale types of activities. And then we use the hexacopter, which is that vertical takeoff and landing. Let's see if this plays. And that was for finer scale operations. I'll talk a little bit as we go through this. So this is the APH-22. So it's very small. That's Katie Sweeney, our pilot on loan to us from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. Tiny, light, easily transportable. The great thing about having 6 props is if 1 or 2 break, it can still fly. For quadricopters or 3-bladed, or actually 4-bladed or less, if you have a blade go out, your platforms can crash. So this is what it looks like taking off. So I talked about knowing your environment and predicting. So in some of the photos, you might see a lot of people standing around. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands is renowned for lots of things, but in particular, a whole lot of birds. So going into this study, we were really, really careful and very concerned of bird strikes. So we have flown hours and hours of missions with both platforms. This is a camera we have looking laterally in order to look at bird interactions. We haven't had a single bird strike the whole time that we've operated. So, and there's been a couple of times where we have gotten into some pretty big bird balls, where it's been nerve-wracking, but nothing adverse has happened yet. But if you haven't been in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, this is what it looks like. This is the island of Laysan. So what we would do with this study is you can see a monk seal down on the beach, down yonder. So we'd fly it over, and we're looking at disturbance because we want to know what it did to birds, but we also want to know what it would do to seals. So we want to be able to fly low enough that we can see all of the natural markings that are on the seal to identify it. Hopefully identify it by flipper tags, but certainly by the bleach marks that are on it. So we would fly over at about, it was a little over 100 feet, and then it was about 60 feet, and then it was about 30 feet, and waiting to see when the animal would respond to it. And we did, once you got down to that 30 feet, even though there's this cacophony of bird noises and wave breaks and all of these things, that mechanical noise did still cut through. It's unusual for the environment. And so you get some seals that might wake up, or they'd look around. They never look up in the sky. They might scratch themselves, look around, and then they'll lay down. But no animal was disturbed into the water. So that's really positive because we know how low we have to fly based on the resolution of the camera to get the information that we need. So not a lot of disturbance, and certainly encouraging to use it in the future. This is the Puma. It's a sling launch. You can launch it by hand, but that gets it up a lot faster, particularly if you're worried about birds, because that initial launch revs up the motors, and then that noise can disturb birds up into the air. This is the front view of it. You can see how quickly it goes. And to use it, this guy's the pilot over here, so he's steering things, and he's mapping the course for automatic flying, and then the other guy who's the engineer, he's just making sure everything looks copacetic. These have all been compressed through various versions of this as I've gone through it, but this is Laysan Island. It gives you, when you start building the maps of this stuff, all the different vegetations that you could look at, and birds clumped on all of these. So some of the shots that were taken, this is the Fish and Wildlife Service field camp. It's being disbanded. They're interested in us looking around there to see what it looks like before and after, and how that changes with time as nature recovers it. Monk seals, might be familiar with them. Bird counts, really actually powerful tool to look for some birds, the white ones, but all the dark ones are hard to see, the frigates and the noddies and stuff that are in there. And so this gives you the sense for submarine debris. That's our tent, that's our people sitting down there building the next platform. And you saw that quick glimpse of the water, so you can see there's actually really quite amazing clarity for looking for marine debris. It's a close-up of the camp. We're also using it to support some of this marine debris again. This is a good day. We're using it to support some archaeological work. This is not archaeology. This is just part of the Fish and Wildlife System that has been left alone. But we are working with the monument to scan for some areas where there might have been some historical sites left over. I want to just show you the power of the zoom from the Puma.
Oh, wow.
So we can fly lower than we were, and we can, but the camera is really quite powerful. So this is just a full island view. But I just like this. This is going to be our recruiting video for the next field camps. So the Puma's following the boat right now. They're going up to this is Pearl and Hermes, up to the North Reef to look at this high area of debris accumulation. So while they drove up there, they just had the platform follow them. So this is where our 2 rehabilitated seals, Pearl and Hermes, were released recently. This is their home. Nice aerial shot. Beautiful reefs. And again, on this screen and compressed, so that's Katie again, and this is just again to show you the zoom that's possible with the Puma and the clarity of the water and looking for marine debris. For those of you that care, this is where Pearl and Hermes were released, and stayed there for 4 or 5 days, and then spent another day in here, and are now off doing their thing. So as I was saying, the Puma is going to be our really high-level, big mapping platform. But on our last day on Southeast Island, this island, we used the Puma to see, or the APH-22 to see how well that did. We weren't prepared. We didn't have the right camera and the right gimbal system to keep the camera steady, but it turned out to be pretty successful. So this may not seem really exciting to you or really all that sexy, but to the people that are managing the resources there, this is phenomenal. So this is not the highest resolution map that we could get, but maps like these are invaluable. So when you talk about tsunami events, hurricanes, which have been popular recently, and climate change and just the ephemeral nature of these islands, it's really important for partners like Fish and Wildlife Service to understand what's going on with the plants and the birds on island. So most of the maps they use right now are Google Maps. And so they're great, they're high resolution and they're high altitude, but they're nowhere near what we can get with these platforms. So this map of this island was created in about 3 hours. It's about 9 flights of the APH-22. And it's an interesting use of the technology that if you take lots of photos and they overlap and you've got a really strong computer to process it, you can actually take those and without LiDAR, turn it into a 3-dimensional map. It's not as high resolution as LiDAR, but you get something like this. And again, this was a really rough go at this. Our final products will be much more sophisticated. But you can see all the plants. This is where our field camp is. This is where we're currently piloting the hexacopter as it flies over. Those are our boats. But again, a really great tool. And eventually, these sorts of things, they'll be automated. Well, they're actually automated now. You just program in the flight and it goes, and you just keep your eye on it and it comes back. But again, for terrestrial surveys, for debris, for birds, for plants, hugely powerful. Zooming it in very specifically, just so you can have one more glimpse at monk seals. This gives you a better vibe or a better feel of the 3-dimensional aspects of this.
Can you read a seal's tag number from the drone?
Not from the Puma, but from the hexacopter. One of the things that we were testing was knowing the resolution of the camera and knowing the size of the tag, we can calculate how low do we think it needs to go in order to be able to do that. To do it really well, you have to fly it with the current camera probably about 15 feet above the seal. We didn't go that far to test it, but you can get from the natural bleaches or from natural bleaches, scars, and from the bleach marks that we do. It's from altitude, it's really easy to tell who they are. So we'll continue to, hopefully a technological advancement will allow us to stay at that height and still be able to see things. But we will continue to test it a little bit lower to see what we can get. But that would be the best.
Are you going to use them here? On the main island?
We'll talk about that when we get to the questions. This is my last thing. So results to date, because there's a lot of ins and outs about that. So far things are really great. Bird interactions are minimal. We've had a frigate bird that flew to the Puma last year and kind of put its beak on the tail of the plane and then flew away. You do see birds interested. When you launch them, birds flush, particularly black noddies. But then within about 30 seconds or a minute, they return back to their roost. So none of those are deal breakers. They just encourage best practices. So don't continue to launch in the same place. Leave that set of birds alone. Disturb them once, move on. Seal disturbance, as I said, has been minimal. The stuff we're getting for our terrestrial monitoring is better than we hoped for. So it's going to be really valuable for all our partners. Marine debris is promising. It's just really hard to find. So we didn't have any known sites that we surveyed, which we were hoping to get to, but weather kept us from going as far on the reef as we wanted to. But we're going to continue to refine, test, and identify the perfect platforms that we need and start to consider main Hawaiian Islands use, which we can discuss in the discussion. So before I open it up, I just want to remind people that there's 2 more monk seal talks. Thank you, Hanauma Bay, for having a month of monk seals. We could do 12 of them if you would like. But Mark talking about something that, these are both new advances in our program. Mark's going to be talking about how we're using social media to learn more about people and seals. So not so much like our Facebook and our blogging that we do. This is actually trying to use these non-traditional data resources to, much like we use actually Monk Seal Mania blog, to make sure that we have all of our sightings for monk seals. We double check that every day, or non-traditional sampling like DB. But actually all of the posts that all the tourists and all of the residents here, they don't want to report stuff to us, but they're happy to put it on the internet and we'll go grab it. So it's really interesting. Mark came up with this project, and I think it's one of the coolest things that we're doing. And then Stacy talking about probably one of the biggest challenges that we have is finding ways to encourage seals that have maybe started going down that dark path of inappropriate interactions, whether it be interacting with people or chasing fishing hooks or swimming up canals, finding ways to change their behavior and get them out of danger. And it's a really big challenge, and Stacy's been taking the lead on that. So before I open it to questions, acknowledgments to all the people that make this happen, and to the people that supported these projects. And again, everything related to monk seals in here was conducted under a permit. So with that, I will open it up if we've got time.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, thank you, everyone. DB.
We all have the same question. The offshore islands is a natural use for
Yep.
or the wild and woolly Upper East Side that's hard to get to if you don't play golf.
Yep. Okay.
Is the GoPro camera the camera that's used?
No. So a couple parts of that to unpackage. So the question for those of you that couldn't hear it is it's about the use of them in the main Hawaiian Islands, particularly for the very under-surveyed nearshore islets that we have here. They're numerous and close to shore. And then it was, what specifically do we use for the camera system? So the first part, it's really easy to use these platforms in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands because except for Midway and technically French Frigate Shoals, there are no airports. So the restrictions up there, and there's not a lot of people, you don't have to worry about privacy, all of those things. And so there's still a lot of paperwork involved, but it's easier to get it through. For us to operate as the federal government, we are very different than what you guys could do just walking out, getting a drone and flying it. If we want to use it for actual work, we have to have our the written private pilot's license. We have to have a pilot's physical. We have to do all these things. Again, these are FAA rules. It's not arduous. But then when you get into civilization, there are restricted airspace, right? So you can't fly. We can't fly within 5 miles of an airport. So that reduces some utility. And there's just a whole lot of these restrictions that when you get these certifications of authorization from the FAA, you have to always have a map that says it is okay for us to fly. And generally when we're flying, we have to do a notice to other pilots that we're going to be, even though we're only going to be flying at 150 feet, let them know. Because the big thing that everybody's worried about is a flyaway. So drones can do that. And that's when you lose connection, there's a short circuit in it, there's whatever weird in the processor, and these things just go. And they're going to go until their battery runs out. So that's the real, from the manager side of things. It's not the privacy issues, it's not the whatever, it's what happens if something gets out of control. So offshore islets, yes, we can use them. And my dream is to be able to help you by standing out at the end of Mackay Pier and fly it out to Rabbit Island and hover over that beach. How far out is the island?
8/10 of a mile.
8/10 of a mile. Done. We'll be doing that next year. So you have to stay right now. Right. We can take a vacation. We can automate this. Yeah. You have to keep the platform within visual line of sight right now. And that's always going to be the case in the main Hawaiian Islands. We might get away from that in the Northwest. So as long as we can keep our eye on it, right now the limit is 1 nautical mile.
We could launch it up for Zodiac.
Yeah, I would prefer to be able to do it from shore because then we don't have, you know what the rigmarole is that goes in with launching a boat. So yes, we will be able to use them on most offshore islets, except for ones around airports or in some restricted airspaces, military and otherwise. We can get waivers for that. And the camera system, GoPro is only used for pretty wide angle visuals. The stuff, it'll be, I won't name other brands just because I don't want to seem selective, but you're always, it needs to be a camera that you can hack so that you can program it in to get it with your controlling system to take the photos. You want high resolution, but it's about weight. So it's finding one that has the right technical aspects and isn't going to weigh down your platform, because the heavier something is, the less you can fly. So as long as we can keep the platform within sight and get it to the island and get it back, then we can use it. The concern will obviously be birds as well over there, depending on the time of year.
The right time of year,
Yeah.
it's be almost impossible.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rabbit Island and other people are sending out drones.
Yep.
That It's wildlife sanctuary.
Yes.
Are they breaking an existing rule now?
So the question is, like many of the offshore islands, Rabbit Island is a sanctuary. I have no idea what the state regulations are. It would not be federally. They're not doing anything wrong from the federal aspect that I know of, as long as they stay underneath a certain ceiling and those operations. The state, again, it might be one of those situations where the technology has outpaced the regulations. I don't even know if the state has the authority to protect airspace. They may
That's
not.
what I'm wondering.
Yeah. So.
You can't read tags. There's a camera that's going to be allow you to read.
The camera that we've used hasn't been able to do it, and we haven't been willing to lower it yet to the height where we know we can. So you can get close, but not quite there yet. But it will be someday. Yeah.
So my question is, if noise is a factor, is R&D working on making quieter motors?
The question is, if noise is an issue, are they going to get quieter? They might get quieter. There is no push to get them quieter.
I'm walking down the street and I go to cross the street and I don't hear a car coming and I realize it's an electric car.
Yeah, I know we're ruining it for everybody with electric cars. So there is not a push to do that. It's not a commercial priority. I think one of the issues that are the next time we do this, we will take it a little bit lower. So as I said, at 30 feet, they looked around, but they didn't know what it was, right? There's no startle response. Canadian Hawaiian Islands will be interesting. So we've had mom pups at the end of the runway at PMRF that have slept through touch and goes of large jets, and they barely look around. So you may have animals down here that are desensitized. So we'll go through that whole same process with them and see what happens. But we just at this time, because it's novel and not a lot of people have done disturbances and they're an endangered species, we took it a little bit slowly. But I'm guessing, I'm almost certain that we are going to get to a point where we can fly it low enough or have a good enough camera that we will be able to get flipper tags, or maybe change flipper tags so that that's the other side of it. And so I always encourage more bleaching because that's just beneficial for everything. But with the flipper tags, I love my program, but it's a step at a time. Technology might move faster than getting us to change our flipper tags. It's been tried and true for all of these years. But it's one of the things that we're discussing, even if it's just larger print or something else, or something that's even just a different pattern to be able to tell who they are.
Some piece of equipment that can read the chips you put.
Really quick one. So you're talking about a pit tag reader on a platform. That's great. Right now, the technology to do that is those pit tags can only transmit as much power as goes into them. So we would need a substantially larger, to be able to read it from 20 feet or 30 feet, you'd have to pulse a lot of energy to get that to come back out. So that's not practical just yet. One last question.
What about submersibles?
That's a whole different presentation. Question was, what about submersibles? Yeah, we're doing a lot. My agency's doing a lot of work. A lot of researchers are doing a lot of work with submersibles. For monk seals, we haven't identified an application for them yet. But there's a lot of people examining habitats and a variety of other things, chasing whales, doing all that stuff, working on those. So, okay, thank you.